All right, welcome everyone to our Thought Leadership Series event today on reentry, redesign, and resilience. As you can probably imagine, having spent most of at least today and probably the last 10 weeks on video calls, it's probably going to take a few moments here for people to trickle in. So we're going to go ahead and admit folks and start the presentation here. And while folks are joining, I'm going to go ahead and just talk through some of our upcoming content, so that way we're not wasting anyone's time while waiting for people to sign in. So my name is Ben Stapleton. I'm the Executive Director here at the U.S. Green Building Council, Los Angeles. Hopefully you've noticed over the past couple months, I know we have because we've been very busy, but we've shifted all of our content online since mid-March. We have quite a bit of education and training coming up here with us through the balance of May and through June, and we're looking to really add additional content all the time. And so I would expect probably 2 to 3 different events from us per week, whether they're webinars, virtual tours, or committee meetings. We really want to try to provide as much content for you as we can during this time for everyone. As part of that, we launched the first week of March our talent portal on our website. You know, perhaps not the best time to focus on talent, but maybe also the best time to focus on talent. And you know, for us, this is really an effort to provide a hub for our industry locally. We post jobs here, we feature employers, we do member spotlights. We have a mentor network that we're launching as part of this that you can sign up for through the site. And this is also where we post all of our training opportunities and upcoming webinars. And we really want to continue to build this out as a hub for the region. We've been talking to a lot of our regional schools and making sure we're providing access for their students. So please give us feedback if you have ways on ideas on how we can improve this and make it better. But this talent portal is really meant to position our region as a global leader in the green building world. Along those lines, we have 7 committees here within USGBC-LA. I won't read them all off here, but focus on everything from advocacy to building decarb. We have a legacy project where we actually build out a community project every year, and our members really help make that happen. And so these are great opportunities for you to engage with us, and I would encourage you to come out to one of these meetings. And we meet monthly within all these groups, and really in these groups we're focused on how can we create impact. We want to come together to have great ideas and then work together to make them happen. So please reach out to us if you have any questions. You can probably see most of the upcoming committee meetings on our website as well. Many people here are probably familiar with the Municipal Green Building Conference and Expo. Believe it or not, this is actually the 19th year of the infamous MGBCE. It may be the most oddly named building event ever, but we love it, and for a lot of people, this is a go-to for them every year. We had originally moved this to May this year, and we moved it to downtown, which is a big change for us. And at this time, we're going to have it at the end of August, and we're going to be having it predominantly virtual, as you can imagine, with the evolving situation that we're going to dive into a little bit more today. And one of the things that we did this year, which is also important, is we added a community green day. So really a day for the general public to engage in the green building conversation, to learn about how they can be more sustainable in their homes. And we're going to have activities that day like learning how to do composting at home, how to electrify your home, how to protect your home from fire, things that can really apply for folks. And our hope is to really help spread our message outside of our industry and to the general public. So please let us know if you have any ideas or questions around this event. We'd love for you to come out. It's free for members. It's a small fee for Friday for non-members, and Saturday is free to everyone. We really just want to get content out there. All right, we're getting close to the golden time here. So right now is our time for gathering and introductions. We have a pretty packed agenda today, and I'm really excited about the speakers we have. Look, I know everyone's probably somewhat exhausted about talking about the impacts of COVID-19 and coronavirus and figuring out how do we handle reentry the right way. But this is actually a really important moment for us to come together, especially as a green building community, and discuss how we're going to adapt, discuss how we're going to approach the situation. And frankly, this is a defining moment for us as an industry and for all of us as individuals. This is an incredible challenge, obviously, for our economy, but also for people on a day-to-day and individual basis. And this is going to close a lot of doors and create a lot of challenges But at the same time, these kinds of market shifts also open a lot of doors and provide the opportunity for us to really raise awareness around the issues around occupant health, resilience, and sustainability that we've all been working on for many years, and knock on wood, we'll be working on for many years to come. And so I just want to stress that this is a time for us to come together and really use this as an opportunity. And, you know, think about the fact that people actually care about health right now in a way that they haven't before, and are looking at their spaces, spending a lot more time indoors in their homes, thinking about when they go back to their office, what's that experience going to look like. And that's the opportunity for us to say, hey, you know, we've been talking about this for some time now. We've been talking about the fact that we need to make our buildings more sustainable, that we need to look at resilience as a bigger issue. And so we need to push a little bit more there. And, you know, I think equity has really just had a much brighter light shined on it in our world during this whole time. And I think it's so important we use that equity framework to look at how we approach reentry, redesign, and resilience as we move forward. You know, the folks that have money, you know, the big companies that have buildings and important brands, you know, they're going to invest in the things that they need to do to help provide healthy space. But we need to be concerned about the whole rest of our population that's not going to be able to do that. How do we protect those people? How do we make sure that everyone's really part of that journey? And that's one of my asks for you today as our community is help us figure out how we can really be more equitable, help us figure out who needs to be part of this conversation and connect us with those people so that we can really make that part of our approach as we look at what does our society look like after this. And that even became apparent to us in putting together the speakers for today. We have a predominantly white group speaking today, and that's a challenge we all have in sustainability and in the green building world. And we need help. I need help. You know, we reached out to a variety of folks, and we were able to have at least one person of color on our panel today, but that's not enough. We need to do more, and I really would love help in trying to make sure that we're being as equitable and diverse as possible as we approach these solutions moving forward. So that's my ask for you. Don't worry, I will shut up eventually. It's going to happen. I hope you're at least happy that I put on a collared shirt for this event. I'm not going to comment on whether I'm wearing pants or not, but I am at least wearing shorts, so you should be happy about that. You should be happy about that. With that, I'm going to turn things over here to Sam Lavelle. I'm very excited that he's able to help lead this conversation for us today. And during the rest of this event, we're actually going to break it down into 3 different categories. So the first category is going to be on reentry, and we're going to have 4 speakers on that. Our next category is going to be on redesign. We'll have 4 speakers on that. And then our final category is going to be on resilience, and we'll have 4 speakers on that. And then afterwards, we're going to really open it up for Q&A and allow all the speakers to really help answer questions. So I would ask if you do have a question, that I would ask that you put it in the chat box, and we're going to save those to the end. We're going to try to allow about 15 to 20 minutes for each of these smaller subgroups. Each of our speakers is going to take 2 to 3 minutes to introduce themselves, talk about their role around the crisis that we're experiencing right now, and then we're going to talk through some challenges and potential solutions. And then once we get to the very end of everything, we're going to talk through some commitments that we can maybe make as companies, as people, as cities and municipalities. The goal is for us to really think about what action can we take after this event. And please keep in mind, and this is just a moment in time. You know, here we are, and I think all of us are experiencing that what we know from day to day is changing. We're not going to have all the answers today. It's not our job today to try to figure out everything that's happening around this crisis. It's really our job today to just take a snapshot in time and get our minds together and figure out what we can do to work together and to move together forward in a better manner. And I'd really like to have this again. We'd like to do these events every 2 months for the next 6 months, to do these bi-monthly, because everything we know today is probably going to be different 2 months from now. And I think we should come together again and talk about how that's changed and how we continue to grow and respond. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Sam. I really appreciate him being available for us today. You can check Sam out on samlavelle.com. I actually went to his website and was pretty blown away by the number of articles he's written. And he wrote a recent article for the LA Times that I thought was really wonderful about the future of architecture in response to this. So Sam, over to you.
Great, thanks Ben, I appreciate it. And I'm not even wearing shorts. I'm wearing pants. I'm very, feel like this is a big step in the right direction. We're reopening. We're getting back to normal, sort of.
You didn't have to do that, Sam. You didn't have to.
I know.
Do that. That's okay.
I know. It's just a big step for me personally. So I think we're making progress. But thanks for having me. Thanks for the US GBC for letting me take part in what I think is going to be really useful. Already, I've learned a lot just preparing for this and talking to people. But as Ben was saying, the concept here is we're sort of getting our bearings, and we're thinking about we've all been stuck at home. We've all been kind of, afraid to watch the news, unfortunately, and it's been a really tough time. But there are opportunities, and we're learning a lot. And already architecture, building, construction, engineering, it's all starting to change, and it's very early. And I should put that as a caveat. We don't know exactly how it's all going to change, but it's already starting. And that was part of what I wrote about in the article that Ben mentioned, the article in the LA Times, which is just an interesting way to start off. And I see it that way. This is all sort of starting a conversation and getting our bearings and starting to ask the right questions. I think that's really important. Ben, are you controlling the PowerPoint?
I am, and you can either just say next or give me a little wave, and I'll move it.
Oh, okay, great.
For you.
Oh, this is fun. It's like a lecture. Okay. So yeah. So the first thing to think about is how COVID is already kind of changing our view, and not just our view, because we're all in this little bubble, but the humans' view of architecture, of design, of everything that we kind of know well, but not everybody really pays attention to be honest. But they're starting to, and there's things that are kind of opening people's minds to kind of new waves in architecture, or waves that have always been around but are sort of been sidelined and now getting a little bit of spotlight. And that may mean that people, when they get used to them, these things may continue. So one of them is, if you look at these pictures here, the top left is a hospital in Wuhan, China, that was built in about 2 weeks. People around the world sort of getting the idea that, we can build more quickly than we do, and we can use modular components, and we can, and another thing that modularity does, we can be more flexible. So if we have a house that we're stuck in for 2 months, hypothetically, we could build an office in the house, with some movable walls. Or we can, if we have a hospital, we can move walls and quarantine off the right amount of people, or, be more flexible for different types of emergencies. So that's something that's entering the lexicon, entering people's minds. The photo in the middle on the top is we're reusing older buildings in new ways. And this is I think that's the Javits Center. That was reused and built into a temporary hospital. And people, all over the world, we're seeing how you can reuse existing buildings, and maybe that'll, take off a little bit more. And it's already, people are getting more familiar with it. On the top right, that's a kind of a tent testing facility, and obviously flexible kind of fabric architecture being used quite a bit these days for that, and for portable hospitals. And that's something that's increasing. And then if you think about things that are increasing in our lives on a more urban level, that picture on the top left, I don't need to tell you that. And that is Zoom and other video conferencing. And that's something that's fundamentally changing the way we are existing right now, and it will continue to. There's no question on that front. We're all, it's changing how we interact. Even when we go back to work, a lot of people won't go back full time. They'll be doing remote. People will be probably living further away, like a lot of people already are right now, and telecommuting. People are watching concerts. They're doing all sorts of everything online. So that has a huge effect. There's also issues of density. And people are worried about cities and density, and does that make us more susceptible to pathogens and other things? And people are worried about that. But I personally don't think that's going to be a permanent thing, but it's certainly something we're going to have to adapt to, and kind of make cities more adaptable to not just pandemics, but other crises and other issues. So it's going to make us think about how we're, organizing our cities as far as density, and also public space. We're closing off parts of roads, and we're starting to, let pedestrians spill out into the street, and closing off spaces for cars. And there's no question to me, in my mind, that's going to continue to ripple even after, we're back to normal, whenever that is going to be. Ben, if you could hit the next slide. And then it's changing how we think about things moving forward. It's still very early, but for example, you have people proposing new kinds of hospitals that are completely mobile and built with. This is a design by an Italian company called Cura, which is essentially mobile hospitals built out of repurposed shipping containers that are connected by inflatable hallways. And we'll see. I mean, these things could be built out. This is a plan on the top right for new restaurant spaces outside. Because if you can't go inside and it's not as safe and you can't get as many people inside, restaurants can stay in business by spilling out into the street and building kind of temporary restaurants outside. And we're rethinking streets completely for COVID and for other things. And obviously, everybody's thinking about how we're going to rethink the office. And I bet you've all heard about a million ideas, from one-way hall traffic to cleaning stations everywhere, and dividers going back up when they were down, and everything. We don't know yet because very few people are actually going back to offices. But once they really start going back, it's going to be interesting to see, and we're really thinking about it. And people are really thinking about spatial layouts. You can see this plan on the right by Steelcase. There's a lot of interesting thinking going in. So we're rethinking kind of everything, and where that's going to wind up, I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine, but there's going to be some interesting changes, and we have to be mindful of that and also contribute to that. So that brings up the next question, because we're talking about green building, obviously. The next slide is, how will that change how we think about green building? And obviously, it's, again, in the next slide, it's already changing that, how we're thinking about green building. We're thinking about, and in my opinion, we're thinking about green building more broadly. And it's always been part of the discussion, whether USGBC or any other kind of green building promoters. It's more than just, it's more than just mechanisms for green building and for sustainability. It's on the left, this fun graphic is about fighting pathogens and health and human health, and I guess animal health, possibly if you have a cat, I heard. But how does that incorporate into green building? And then in the middle, the concepts of wellness. How does that incorporate? If you're stuck at home, or if you're working from home, or if you're building a building, we're thinking a lot more about how our spaces affect our mental health, because we all know that everything's been magnified since we've been home for this long, and we're noticing how our spaces affect our mental health. And maybe we need more natural light, maybe we need more fresh air. And then the third is, we're thinking about green building, or we're building in general, and equity. We're seeing people that don't have the luxury of being stuck in their houses going crazy. They're actually having to go to work and expose themselves in warehouses and meatpacking plants, driving delivery, a million different ways. And we're thinking, wait, this is not necessarily fair how we're building this built environment. How do we, A, make it safer for people who have to work, and B, how do we change things so things are just, are significantly more equitable in the built realm, and in the every realm for that matter. It's making us think about it. So then the next slide is that obviously we've already been thinking about this, and green building is, a lot more. It already is thinking about wellness solutions and health solutions, like natural light, obviously like natural ventilation and other passive solutions. Materials that go into a building, we may be thinking more about how they react to pathogens, but we're obviously talking about that all the time. That's already there. And we're thinking about resources and equity. It's already part of the conversation, but it's just a conversation that now I think is ramping up incredibly quickly, and it's going to be an important discussion to keep talking about. So if you could hit the next slide. So I think that what that's going to mean, and I think it's an important thing to talk about and to think about, is will USGBC and other institutes looking at green building and healthy building, will they start to overlap more? Will they need to discuss things more? Will they need to share their findings more? Will the checklists need to be more holistic rather than segmented? These are questions that I think COVID is really bringing up already, because these issues really interact with each other, and they can't just be thought about in silos anymore. So that's a good question. And then the question is, how does that happen? I mean, how do you kind of keep that rigor that you have in one checklist? And if you're going to start, pulling in things from other institutes, what do you pull in? How do you How do you organize that? How do you keep it rigorous? So there's a lot of questions I think that are really, fitting to be asked right now. And we're thinking about that, in the scheme of things as our economy reboots. How can we rethink our entire economy to incorporate all those things? Is there going to be a Green New Deal like we've talked about? Are we just going to, kind of not take the bull by the horns and rethink our economy? Or are we just going to do business as usual? So I think these are really, really important questions and kind of structural, fundamental issues that COVID is, again, it hasn't invented or hasn't just spurred it, but these other issues, but it's kind of brought them to the fore, and it's important to be discussing every single one of these things. So what was the next one, Ben? Sorry. And it's certainly about thinking about, we're all focused on how green building and how building in general and how everything responds to COVID and pandemics and germs. And, we're like every new rendering we see is about how offices are going to respond to COVID, but we have to respond to a lot more than COVID. And COVID is just one of many kind of new challenges or sometimes returning challenges that are hitting us as our world gets more, moves faster, gets more interconnected. We think we're immune to all these things, but as history is showing us every few years, we're getting hit with a lot of new challenges all the time. So that goes from global warming, and no, the Earth is not actually on fire. That's not quite accurate, but you get the idea. That goes for sprawl, pollution. There's Katrina. We're being reminded of natural disasters and flooding. I don't have to tell people in LA about natural disasters, or if you're in New York, there's issues with terrorism and with safety. There's issues of how do we deal with migration and people moving all over the place, issues of gentrification and the affordability of housing. So COVID is really just kind of a primer. It's just the tip of the iceberg and getting us thinking about how we're going to plan ahead for so many of the issues that are facing us. So that brings me to the final point, which is that's what I want us to do is sort of think about all these things. I'm just sort of, what I'm doing is kind of bringing up issues, but what you need to do is come up with some action items. If we're going to adapt green building and building in general to the new reality, how are we going to do that? So we need to really have plans to do that. We need to start thinking about them. And we're not going to have all the answers now, but you got to start thinking now. Otherwise, we're going to be behind. We don't want to be behind like we were with COVID. We want to be ahead of the curve. And again, we need to support legislation and ways of thinking that are going to address all these issues, including the Green New Deal and other, I think, even more holistic plans to really rethink how we think about things. And another thing to think about green building, and an important point, is that pandemics and green and sustainability are linked so intimately, because a lot of scientists are proving, and we're learning the hard way that we need to listen to them about things, that the more climate change impacts us, the more likely it is to have more pandemics. If you have changing climates in different areas, you have the temperatures change in different places, you have different sort of animals moving different places, new pathogens being introduced, new people being introduced. It's just inevitable that the more we have climate change, the more we're going to have pandemics. And I'm not saying that's what caused COVID, but it's been quite well researched that that's what's going to happen. And then the biggest question of all, what else? What are we not thinking of? What can you think of? What can we address? And that's a really big one. So these are just really important things that I hope we can start to talk about today, and then just keep the conversation going on for a long, long time. And hopefully we won't be all doing it remotely for forever, but for now, I think it's the right place to start. So yeah, that's where I'm beginning, and I want you to take it from here.
Thank you, Sam, and congratulations for being our first framer in our 5th of our thought leadership events. It's actually stayed within his or her time frame. So thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure.
We'll send you a cookie or a pizza or something. We'll figure that out at some point.
I'm proud. I'm very, very proud to have that honor.
Yeah, so our mission today is just to solve everything that Sam laid out for us. It should be no big deal at all. We got this. It should only take us about an hour and a half. That's good news.
Exactly.
So the first topic we're going to dive into a bit here is really around reentry. This is something I know, for me at least, I feel like probably, 4 out of the 10 conversations I have a day are on this topic right now. And everyone's really trying to figure out the best approach. So I'm going to allow our sub-panelists here to really introduce themselves and talk about their role in looking at reentry and some of the challenges. As discussed, everyone's going to take 2 to 3 minutes, and then we're going to ask a couple of questions to close it out before we move to the next sub-panel. So Jen, you're up first.
Sure. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Success.
Awesome. I love when it works the first time. That's always great. Okay. So my name is Jennifer Berthelot-Jelovic. I'm the president and CEO of A Sustainable Production, and we're a global sustainability and wellness consulting firm. So I'm a lead AP, faculty fellow, a well AP, and well faculty as well. And really we focus on well portfolio and lead volume implementation. Those are expertise. So when everything shut down, our colleagues, clients, prospective clients all started coming to us asking for answers. And to be honest, in the beginning, I just wasn't sure who to turn to for resources because there was so much mixed information coming out of everywhere and everyone. And so then I turned to the International Well Building Institute, and they had created their task force on COVID-19 and other respiratory infections. So they're focusing on prevention, preparedness, resilience, and recovery. So I joined that task force really so I could spend a lot of time learning from the experts and sharing knowledge. And then I've also been spending a lot of time attending the IWBI Places Matter webinars and following Joseph Allen. So if you're not following Joseph Allen, he's the assistant professor of exposure and assessment science, and then the director of healthy buildings at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And they put some really great solid information out of there. So I've been following that a lot. And then through the COVID task force, sharing a lot of ideas, research, questions, solutions. And in the past weeks have also been looking at, as IWBI has put out strategies for the well building standard that we can use to fight against COVID. That's been really helpful. So we've been using a lot of, we've seen everybody from Cushman and Wakefield to JLL, everybody's putting out these great papers and we're assembling them and going through them, and everyone's focused on what does reentry look like. And for us, we're looking at it in 2 phases. We're looking at the immediate short-term reentry that includes everyone being 6 feet apart and working remotely and movement patterns versus what does that look like long-term. And so really looking at the IWBI approach to that, but then utilizing their new health safety rating as a tool for benchmarking our projects and portfolios as a 2-pronged approach to reentry, looking at that immediate short-term and long-term. So that's really where we're at, is trying to focus on this from the standpoint of providing information for our clients and in learning from the experts globally. And we're just really excited. We've honestly seen people really in the last few months now understand that places matter, and where you live, work, learn, and play has a huge impact on you. So I think it's a really important time for all of us to really start being vocal and using both sustainability. I'm super excited, Sam, to have this conversation about the role of sustainability and wellness play and who should be doing what. So I can't wait to get to that part later. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jen. Sean?
Sure. Well, first off, I'll let everybody know that that's not me. I don't know where that picture came from. It's the first time I've seen it, but I don't know if it's my doppelganger or not. I don't think it quite looks like me, but nonetheless, I'm here. And my name is Sean McCready. I'm with Underwriters Laboratories, otherwise known as UL. Healthy Buildings, prior to that, we were acquired this past July by UL to continue the work that we do. And my focus has always been, while I do a lot within the sustainability world in terms of the technical stuff that goes with, well and LEED and BREEAM and, you name it, Fitwel, on and on. Generally speaking, my focus has always been on the indoor environment in general. Been doing it for several decades. COVID-19 brings with it a unique challenge, but not that unique in many ways when we talk about what we need to do right away when it comes to reentry with our buildings, because that's kind of at our door, at our feet right now. In some regions, people are going back to work, and our primary focus on this, and something where I've been leading the initiative at UL, mainly here in the States, but globally as well, is what can people that own and or manage facilities, be it a corporation or a third-party manager or just CRE or anything else, what is it that we can and should do to prepare for people coming back to the building with regards to the building itself? And we've been doing a lot with advisory and everything as well, but really, how do we evaluate buildings in a pragmatic way that makes sense, and not just about looking at stuff that has to do with viral transmission. And, look, there's only so much you can do, but there are things you can do. But there's all these secondary consequences of having buildings sit vacant. A lot of you probably heard this before, but water quality is a huge issue. Mark my words, you're going to hear a whole lot in the coming months about issues with waterborne pathogens from domestic water sitting in pipes and whatnot. That's just one example of different unintended consequences of the built environment sitting vacant. And then also things that we can and should do with regards to viral transmission and understanding it, and just preparing to have people come back. And it's a, fairly tricky thing, but it's not really that new. I mean, Jen was talking about Joe Allen before, and a lot of the stuff that is applicable now is the same stuff we've been preaching about productivity and indoor air quality and the indoor environment in general. So yeah, it's kind of on steroids now, and we got to hit it hard and fast, but it's not, it's not really that new. And then the other part of it, and then I'll shut up and pass it on. So I'm sure I've already used up my 2 minutes, but there's all these emerging technologies and new, things that you can put in buildings. And a lot of what I do, along with an advisory team that I have, is help kind of guide our clients and our friends and colleagues through all of that with, what really does potentially make sense, and where is some of that hard marketing kind of, not snake oil, but maybe setting some false expectations. So with that, I'll stop talking and pass the mic, so to speak.
Thank you, Sean. And I think we just switched you and Sam's pictures, so it's relatively similar. I don't think anyone lost there.
Yeah, the windows covering up my Sam's picture. So that's
Natalie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Peer. I am with Hudson Pacific Properties, which is a large commercial office real estate owner, operator, and developer. We have mostly Class A office space in urban centers from LA up to Vancouver, with tenants, a lot of creative media tech tenants. So things like the Uber headquarters in downtown San Francisco, and a lot of Amazon buildings in Seattle. And down here, we've got the Netflix campus in Hollywood, and the new Google headquarters at Westside Pavilion in West LA that we're developing at the moment. So we're up and down the coast. My role is twofold. One half of the role is I lead what we call our Better Blueprint program, which is our environmental and social impact program, and the priorities within that are sustainability, health, and equity. And then the second hat I wear is I lead a lot of our work all around innovation and technology and prop tech. So when this hit, it ramped up both roles for me way more than 100%. So I've been chairing what we've been calling our tenant reintegration task force. So that's a group of internal and external experts that are helping us navigate through all the issues that we've just discussed. What changes do we need to make to HVAC, to cleaning, to ingress, egress, elevators, across the board? And we've developed our own standard operating procedures for our portfolio. And as the thought leadership evolves, like Jen, I think you mentioned the reports from Cushman Wakefield and others. As those come out, we're monitoring them and making sure that our SOPs are up to date. We're also reflecting back to the city, because my CEO is co-chairing with Lou Hornton CBRE, the mayor's LA office working group. So specifically thinking about how do we get LA offices back up and running safely. So the work we're doing is guiding our portfolio, but also some of the regulatory work happening in the background. And it's been, I would say, really, really hard and really interesting. I mean, of all my whole career, things are happening at light speed, and as COVID accelerates everything, so it accelerates the kind of business processes and transformations that were already underway for us. So I think some of the tech initiatives that I had underway have been completely accelerated. Things like I had been building out an app for our tenants that it took us 6 months to pilot it at 3 properties. And once COVID hit, I got the green light and we rolled it out to our entire portfolio in 30 days. I mean, it was like, and their plan to do that beforehand was in 18 months. So we shrunk it from 18 months down to 1 month because we needed to, because the communication is so important right now. From our point of view, what good is it if we implement all these SOPs, but none of our tenants know about it? We need to make sure tenants are aware of the changes that have happened and they feel the confidence and trust in us and in the buildings that they occupy, so that they actually do come back. And we're starting to see that already across most of the jurisdictions we're in. The stay-at-home orders lift on June 1st, but already this week we're starting to see the past 2 months we've had less than 5% occupancy, but this week we're ticking upward, hovering between 10 and 20%. So we're starting to see people come back, and so we're glad that we got all these procedures in place.
Thank you, Natalie. And I just want to comment on something she just said, which I think has been ringing true for a lot of us, is just how busy everyone in our space has been the last couple months. And to think about that for a moment, that we're really needed right now to figure out how do we move forward. And I feel like for a lot of us, we've been over here talking about sustainability and beating that drum for a long time, and we weren't as needed for many, many years. And so that's definitely a recurring theme, and I think that presents some of the opportunity for us to take things in the right direction. Next up, Sam, another man with an equally good mustache.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on the panel. It's great to be here with all these smart people. It's a lot of fun too. So I work for Able Services. I'm sure you guys have heard of Able. We're a national provider of engineering and janitorial services. A lot of our employees are currently working, and they're on job sites right now, and they're taking extra precautions to protect themselves. Safety is huge for us, and something that we did as not just our organization, but a few other organizations got together and we created the Cleaning Coalition of America. So the goal was to communicate to elected officials at the state level and also federal level that, hey, we're an essential business and we have an essential workforce. We need PPE, we need cleaning supplies, and we need extra protection for our employees. So we've kind of worked with our competitors on this, such as ABM and SBM and a couple companies throughout the country, to create this group to advocate for our industry. A lot of our employees, they aren't working from home. They're not using Wi-Fi and making coffee and baking banana bread at their houses. They're still at work in the same way they were before. We've seen a huge issue with procurement of PPE and procurement of cleaning supplies and chemicals. It's either gangbusters or bust. We have some job sites with thousands of masks, and just imagine like how much a site would potentially use in terms of masks for our cleaning staff and then employees. And then if you're doing high frequency cleaning and touch point cleaning all throughout the day, probably 5 different times throughout the day, you're going to be using a lot more materials. And so we advocated on behalf of the industry, on behalf of our employees, to get more PPE and to get more supplies so that we can do our job and to help America get back to work. And so that was really cool to me, like seeing like our company work with our competitors throughout the country to try to put together this messaging, and advocate on behalf of the employees. So that's been really exciting for us here. And we're inside of buildings already, and we're getting asked so many questions on, what the chemicals it is we're using, what kind of, protocols we have, and what is for your return to work policy. And, we work with, thousands of different clients. So everyone has their own plan, and we're just trying our best to accommodate, and ultimately we're, trying to keep our employees safe as well.
Thank you, Sam. And so my first question for this subpanel here is, really, how do we stay green during this time? We just mentioned the waste issues we're experiencing around increases in PPE and others. Green cleaning, very difficult to maintain right now for a lot of property owners. And so the other thing I think I'd bring up too is when we're looking at increased filtration of air, that's going to drive up energy costs. So my question to this group is can we maintain green operations and practices right now? And if so, what are some of the ways to do that?
Sure. This is Jen. So this to me is actually kind of an opportune time, a little to touch on that sustainability overlap, right? For me, I'm looking for USGBC right now, globally, nationally, not the chapter, to really help guide us on this, right? So I think there's a lot of unknown in sustainability right now where people are looking to change their cleaning. They're suddenly freaking out and think they should be using chemicals. People are going to start de-densifying offices, and in doing that, that could be catastrophic to the environment if people need to take larger amounts of space again after they've moved to things like free address. So for me, I'm really hoping that the USGBC is going to step forward and really help us get through this, right? We're looking at all the single-use plastic. Even when you tell Grubhub or whoever not to deliver your at-home, don't bring me, it comes with 20 pairs of your utensils. So I think from the smallest thing, from the PPE and the masks all the way up to the built environment and putting in larger mechanical systems, how are we dealing with the upgrade and filtration we need without overworking systems, or, what does all of this look like? My clients are looking at things like UV lights and using, a UV system or thermal system to walk through when entering into buildings. That again, it's additional plug loads. And as Sean alluded to earlier, water issue is going to be an issue. So I'm really hoping that we're going to see USGBC not suddenly make a jump into healthy buildings, but do what they've done and stay the course of the last 25 years and focus on their mission and vision and lead us right now, because I'm looking to them to help understand how do I deal with all these added technologies or changes on the sustainability side, because I have IWBI and people are using Fitwell and the market's already inundated. We don't need to confuse and muddy the water for our clients. I think we need a united front of, we need healthy buildings for people and planet. They go hand in hand, and without that, you have no equity. And so I think right now what we need to do is really work together with these organizations to create sustainability and wellness and help people understand that, like, in order for us to have all of these things, they have to go hand in hand.
Thank you, Jen. I think that was well said, and if there's ways that we can help you deliver that message, happy to do that. We're completely independent from national, but I think it's an important message that needs to be heard right now. You have something, Sean, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I already messed up by not using my raised hand feature, so I apologize for that. I went back. I think what I was going to say is this is going to be a challenge in the short term. It's going to start, clearing itself up a little bit, but just so new. I mean, I don't want anybody don't already know, but this is just kind of human nature. It's knee jerk. I get calls every day. Hey, ASHRAE says to increase my ventilation and my filtration. Should I try to get HEPA filters and dial up my outside air 100% and caution wind and not worry about energy? And it's like, no. You got to be thoughtful about this. And yeah, I think it's okay in the short term to back a little bit on the energy side for ventilation and filtration to a point. And there's diminishing returns when it comes to protecting against a virus, but we got to do it carefully, and we have to let data come out. And it takes a little time for the data to come out for a novel virus like this, and just not be so knee jerk and just throw caution to the wind. And it's going to be hard. It's going to take a little time before we can start being greener. I say we, I mean society. Where they're given information, don't steer the unknown, figure, I'm never going to use a spoon out in public again, or I'm just going to use all the energy. I don't care. I'm going to, it's 100 degrees outside. I'm going to just burn my system out because I don't want everybody getting the virus. It's going to take a little time, and hopefully people, are at least somewhat short term until before it gets out. That's my opinion anyway.
Thank you, Sean. Sam, thank you for using the raise your hand feature. Much appreciated. You can go next. Yeah.
Thanks. So, I was thinking a lot about what Natalie was saying was, communication is so important, and they actually accelerated their tech product, their app for Hudson through this time period and said, hey, we got to communicate with all the tenants. And for us, like, our number one priority is to make people feel comfortable and bring like the comfort level to when you're returning back to the office. And so, everything we're doing is to make people feel comfortable. And then at the same time, for someone who's 50-50 and they may not want to return to an office because of COVID, they had a nicer space, something with some kind of wellness precaution or wellness criteria surrounding the space, you might be more likely to go in. So we want to make people feel comfortable with, hey, this is everything we're doing for the cleaning aspect and what we're doing for the building engineering services to make sure that the air is clean and the space is clean. But then additionally, like looking at it through the eyes of wellness, hey, we want people to go back to work. And if people don't want to go back to work, this whole industry or this whole ecosystem of the built environment, we become a lot less valuable and they won't have money to pursue more sustainability endeavors. So I think right now, focus is making people comfortable returning to work.
I'm glad you hit on that point, Sam. I think that's really important. And any last comments from this group before we move to the next sub-panel? Natalie, anything you want to add to that? Because I think the confidence issue is a big one.
Yeah, I agree that in the short term, this is going to result in some negative sustainability impacts, whether that's increased energy use or, more people driving to work because they don't want to use public transportation or the chemicals. But I think actually in some ways it's accelerating some of the longer term trends that for those of us in the sustainability world have been frustrating to see moving at a glacial pace. And now they're moving so much faster. We've got, all this awareness about air quality and more connection to nature and the slow living. I think there's some societal changes that we're seeing. And then also, Sam brought up the app that I had talked about before. So it accelerated that project for us. But what that means is, the reason I was rolling out the app is we're a tech-forward company. It's important for us to be able to communicate with our tenants using technology, but also because for the other hat that I wear, I wanted a platform to drive healthy and sustainable behaviors across the 50,000 people who are in our buildings every single day. And it would have taken me 18 months to get the app up and running to do that. It's now up running this week. And so now I have this platform where I can roll out virtual free yoga, meditation, sustainability awareness, all this programming that right now is virtual. It will become in person as the world returns to normal. But it is, from my perspective, I think it's a really cool way that our ability to create positive impact has been accelerated. I guess the other thing I will say that has been, from a strategic point of view, interesting is you mentioned the increased energy use, Ben, is this whole, as we are realizing how much more energy we're going to have, it has become even more paramount to us to decouple our carbon footprint from our energy use. And we had a commitment to go carbon neutral by 2025. We're accelerating that to this year. We're just we need to be able to have an energy spike and have zero impact on our carbon footprint. Carbon's the metric we ultimately care about, and we've got to keep them separate.
Thanks, Natalie. That's a really important point and a good one to hear, and maybe something we can have as a follow-up for after this to continue the conversation, because I think how we deal with this energy use is really important, and again, a moment of opportunity for us. All right, I'm going to move to our next sub-panel. We're going to come back to everyone when we get into our commitments and Q&A, so you'll have more time to speak, and I appreciate you hanging with us. So we're going to talk a little bit about redesign right now, and again, each panelist 2 to 3 minutes and kind of your role and what we're experiencing, and as you think about design moving forward, what kind of changes should we expect to see? Elena?
Sure. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Great. So my name is Elena Bondarev. I work for CTEC, which many of you may not be familiar with. It's a company relatively new to the U.S., but it's an international building science consultancy that is independent. So that's the only thing we do. We don't do any sustainability advisory. And so historically, the work has kind of been split between forensics and industrial hygiene and looking at sick buildings and solving problems, and also and FitWell certification. So CTEC's kind of most prolific well performance testing organization in the world to date, with about 170 well PVs done. So what's been really interesting, and as Sean has mentioned, is really going in this direction of how do we leverage science now? So yes, as kind of Sean and UL and some of the companies are doing, we're doing a lot of safe reentry work. So developing plans, materials advisories, right? So yes, now if you're going to throw chlorine at everything, materials failure is coming on, right? So how do you clean? How do you then validate safe reentry? So actually issuing certificates of safe reentry on the basis of testing done on site and that sort of thing. When I joined CTEC, it was actually an interesting thing for me, because my background, as I think Natalie and others have mentioned, kind of our whole career has been in sustainability. But I felt like, hey, maybe we're at a cusp with this healthy building revolution to actually have human self-interest drive sustainability, which is something we have not had a chance to do. Embodied carbon, light pollution, topsoil, these have been very external, very abstract concepts for most people, right? So I was like, great. I'm fine focusing my entire career on kind of having a greater demand and almost kind of selfishness of people demanding, expecting better spaces. And of course, COVID, just as everybody said, just accelerated this to an nth extent. And so when it comes to kind of going forward, what I'm hoping to see when it comes to redesign is really leveraging science to create better buildings. Because yes, I agree with what's been said, and also on the IWBI COVID-19 task force, as Natalie and some others are, I think it's inarguable that going forward, buildings will be inseparable from our understanding of our health and well-being. What I'm concerned about, though, is as a human species, we kind of suck at learning from lessons. And so part of it, and kind of seeing my responsibility and our responsibility as built environment professionals, to really embody these, because we do need to approach buildings differently, right? When we start taking new jobs, when it comes to redesign, I'm hoping people start asking, what is your disaster preparedness plan? What features of the design do prevent disease transmission, right? How do you enable me and work from home, for example? What is the OHS, system around that? But for that, especially when equity comes in, I do hope that many people on this call, and I know Ben has an advocacy committee as well, help drive regulation. Even though I've dedicated my career to voluntary rating systems like, WELL and Green Star and LEED, it takes too long when it comes to equity. And I feel like we can't have it both ways. We can't say air quality is absolutely critical because it impacts your physical well-being, your cognitive ability, but let's take 20 years to see how it trickles down through voluntary mechanisms. So one of the things when it comes to design and leveraging science that I hope to see is more informed regulation, so that the most vulnerable of us, this is, the kids, the elderly, the refugees, whoever these groups are, start getting advantage of what to date, and again, coming from the well world, to date is primarily the prerogative of the most privileged. And we love the work, of course we do, and it's important. But how do we catalyze this to really drive the uptake to the most vulnerable? And I would love, from the advocacy perspective, actually see us build arguments. If good air quality is a basic human right, what does that look like? Is there new laws, new regulation, new guidelines that come out around that? And so, in terms of going forward, yes, designing for health and leveraging science. And I think science right now also can help quash the fight or flight or freeze response, right? Because it's objective, it's something we can measure, it's something we can communicate. And as part of that, and that's when I'll stop, for redesign, I'm also hoping that we can start designing for validation. The way that we have fire inspectors come in, and of course, well buildings, again, are used to having well performance verification agents come through. But fundamentally, what if we started designing to know that people will come through and validate? And that is part of the process, so that buildings perform well for people. And lastly, for redesign, I think that materials, I'm really hoping that all of this amazing work in biomanufacture and all of this will get a boost, because some materials, due to their biome, let's take wood, they generally have better disinfectant properties than a lot of the synthetic materials we use. So So I'm hoping that building science and material science gets a boost out of that as well. And I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Elena. And I like drawing that connection on the material side. I think we talk a lot about embodied carbon and, finally having some of that transparency around materials, but really thinking about how can we also look at that for future health proofing. I think that's important. Sam, we're going to come back to you a little bit when we do some of the Q&A. But Dominique, would you like to go ahead now?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Great to be here with you. Thank you, Ben, for putting this on. I think this conversation is really important because we understand that COVID-19 primarily spreads from person to person, primarily indoors. So this poses a question for all of us in thinking about redesign of how to optimize our spaces for healthy outcomes. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about our municipal buildings because we want to safely reopen those for the public, because we have hundreds of libraries, senior centers, rec and parks that are currently being used as homeless shelters. We have fire stations, we have office buildings. So we have a lot of different typologies to think about. And we are. I think Natalie mentioned your company is on one of the advisory groups. And so we have been convening industry advisors as we look forward to reopening. So we have guidance published for retail, reopening, as well as manufacturing. I think office will be one of the last guidance documents to come out because we really want people to telecommute. It has a huge impact on the environment and people are generally quite productive, especially if they have a dedicated space at home in which they can work, which I know is challenging because a lot of people are trying to do, their entire job plus homeschool right now. So we're, looking forward to redesigning and rethinking our spaces. And the pandemic is so fascinating because government is very slow to change. We've been having, the same procedures. This when you have to come to 7 different counters in order to get your, projects approved. And so we are thinking through at every level of the city right now, how we really, jump forward, how we move most of our systems online, and how we allow employees to be working at home because it makes a lot of sense. It streamlines things. It's a good use of taxpayer dollars, and allowing for more efficiency is better in all government processes and for increased transparency as well. So on the facility side, I'm on our working group, which for our buildings is thinking about systems, integration, and HVAC, and what we'll do to optimize our own building stock. And that should be really interesting because we're also wanting to move into a more touchless environment. Meaning also back to Natalie thinking about apps and how apps can control visitor access, elevator access, and many other ways, can also help with contact tracing and just multiple points of efficiencies within buildings. So I'm glad to be here, and I'll give a plug for some really great blogs that Gensler has been producing. If you're on the Gensler Insight listserv, some of the most fascinating things I've read recently is case studies from other cities, and they have quite a lot there from China, and what the first day back at work looks like in China and the first day back at school. And I'll just end by saying, we're looking to other cities that have, come out of the pandemic to understand, best practices and what they've been able to do in terms of the built environment. And some of the most interesting things I think are actually around transportation and thinking about slow streets or no car streets. And I know we've started a pilot last weekend in the city of LA with a couple of slow street projects, and I know there are more to come this weekend, and looking forward to how, rethinking our road system and having Angelenos be able to walk, bike, scoot, or whatever they want to do aside from being in a single occupancy vehicle.
Thank you, Dominique, and what a great moment and opportunity to rethink a lot of those processes. That sounds like an incredible opportunity. Chris?
Hey guys, it's Chris Pike. I'm joining you guys from DC, so I'm a little bit further away, a little ahead of you in terms of the calendar. But it's nice to connect. I'm an environmental scientist. I have worked in academia, government, nonprofit, startups, and I've led a number of GBCI's subsidiaries, including GRESP and most recently ARC. Germaine to this conversation, I'm one of the principal investigators for a long-term Robert Wood Johnson funded collaboration with the University of Virginia School of Medicine called the Green Health Partnership. And thinking about redesign, I just wanted to give you 3 quick bullets of things that seem relevant to me. One is this issue of designing for confidence. How do we intervene in the design and operation of facilities to make people confident enough to re-enter? And this is both psychological, and I think we've been thinking a lot about post 9/11 when we were doing overt actions. We were putting security guards out front, but we were also doing invisible actions. And so how are we literally designing for confidence and knowing if that works? The second piece is designing for the whole organization. I think this notion of pushing sustainability deeper into the portfolio and not accepting that green trophy and seeing the importance of that, I think is something we will take out of this. And the third one is, which I think may be the most important, is designing for the weakest link. I think that this notion of saying, hey, cashiers and janitors are as important as COOs and CFOs for the operation of the company, and we should be extending our efforts to create better buildings to them. And it's easy to say and hard to do. And so the thing that I would say in terms of what we are trying to do to advance that, particularly in ARC right now, is I feel really good that we are taking this moment to provide free and low-cost tools for performance scoring and management. And I'm really excited that around June 1st, we're going to release a new set of reentry support tools that are going to be available to any space or building to measure relevant aspects of facility management, occupant experience, and IEQ. And so we're excited to work with folks across the country on those. And I just think, as many others have said, I think it's a moment to kind of both meet the moment, meeting this practical moment of helping people feel confident going back in the world through what we can do with the design and operation of the built environment, but also using that moment to enable some things. And as someone mentioned earlier, one of those things is we have been looking for years to try to get people to measure indoor air more than once a year, maybe just once a year. Well, now we have people talking to us about measuring it every day or every hour over big percentages of their portfolio. That is different, and we want to seize that moment. So anyway, just a few thoughts from me. I'm looking forward to the dialogue.
Thank you. So, one of my questions for this group, which may not be that apparent at first, is really around the cost and the finance of doing this. When we talk about redesign in the short term and redesign in the long term, how are we really gonna make that happen in the short term? And I think about Dominique doing this at a municipal level. I think about folks doing this in private buildings. What redesign? I guess my question is, what redesign do you think is possible and affordable right now? And then how does that apply to the future? Not an easy question, but who wants to go first here?
I'll start. I'm like hung up on this question because the most affordable solutions are also like the most basic and kind of tacky. I'm thinking about like stickers on the floor that indicate where you can line up. I mean, you've seen them in supermarkets and other areas, but I mean, what we're wanting to do at the city scale is, develop a suite of tools so that, this actually becomes achievable, the ambition of retrofit that we want to do, which combines, energy efficiency, plus design for health and wellness for our public buildings. We have some ideas that we're kicking around, one of which is establishing a revolving loan fund. But I think what's interesting about this moment is that I think cities all over the country, probably all over the world, are really open to new models. We've just gotten comfortable with P3s, and we have a couple of those types of projects going. But I think, for the first time, our, leadership within the budget team is looking for new ways to finance and fund projects. So I think we'll probably see some new, more collaborative funding models come out that will be a result of the current, budget and economic positions that we find ourselves in.
Thank you, Dominica. Elena?
Yeah, fantastic. I just want to also add, most of the time we've spent with our green building movement building efficiency arguments and business cases. One of the advantages of really capitalizing on this moment, and Dr. Allen has been mentioned, and Chris, I know, has worked towards that as well, is if we actually see this moment to really position buildings as a vehicle for public health, the beauty of a public health argument is a whole other types of monies open up, both in terms of connecting that to grants, and you've mentioned Green New Deal. I think we need to advocate if buildings indeed can address equity issues, chronic disease issues, productivity issues, the knee-jerk fear of spaces issues, et cetera, then tying them to stimulus monies. But for that, we need to be, as a movement, we need to be a lot more active in federal advocacy right now. And I know that's been a challenge because of the 501c3 model of the USGBC. But yes, public health argument, because fundamentally, if we can start telling people you are as safe here or maybe safer, and the investments and the air quality and the light and all of these things that we know will actually improve your health. Whilst in your house, you might, be living with 3 generations of family requiring care and working at a kitchen counter. We can maybe make different kind of business arguments around that.
Thank you. Well, I think I'm going to move us into the resilience part of the dialogue, unless anyone has anything else they'd like to add before we move on.
Ben, I was going to say one quick thing.
Yeah, go ahead, Sam. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one thing that's important, and I think it's about like taking advantage of the timing, because I mentioned that people are rethinking offices. We're seeing all that. People are starting to rethink maybe restaurants, theaters, but they're rethinking everything. So the question is just being aware of how to get it in the door with all these conversations, and it's sort of like it's a question of getting into the conversation, because there's so many conversations on so many wide levels we're just rethinking, as I mentioned before, rethinking how we do if we're going to have to go to a stadium to watch a game. How are we going to rebuild that? So if green building and green building experts can get into that conversation, from the beginning, it's a question of getting into that conversation and injecting, that kind of thinking into this, because it's just being aware and being part of all these conversations that are just kind of multiplying times like 100 times 1,000 right now. It's kind of overwhelming, but it's incredible opportunity.
Ben, I'll just tack on to Sam. Go ahead, Chris. Really quickly. One is I couldn't agree more that the soup and sea of ideas and swirling. How many places can you cover? But the point I just wanted to very, very briefly say, look, I think it's true that designing and operating buildings for health costs differently. I don't know that it's empirically true that it costs more. And I don't think we should accept the narrative at face value. Nobody's coughed up a bunch of definitive studies that say, and this has nothing to do with the cost of a particular rating system. I think when it comes down to what it takes to promote the health of the most vulnerable, whether it's housing or cashiers or janitors or whatever, it's not, I don't think it's a given that it costs more. And I'm not sure it should cost more. It definitely costs different. And so I just want to make sure we don't buy into a straw man before before that's actually congealed. Just want to offer that as a perspective. We can still make that not the storyline. So thanks.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's part of us shifting the lens through which the analysis is being done and the metrics that are being used. You know, people are just looking at their improvement costs, but not looking at increases in productivity or looking at savings when it comes to healthcare costs. Then they're not getting a complete picture. So I think that is part of the job in front of us, is how do we redefine those costs going forward and what the returns are from those investments. Next up, going to talk a little bit here about resilience. Same format, just a couple minutes on kind of your role and what's happening. Chris?
Hi, great. Thanks for having me. And it's been a really interesting discussion back and forth. Lots of really good ideas. When we think about resiliency around this issue and building health, I think one of the things that is really critical is how do we develop approaches that are consistent across the topology of the buildings that exist out there? The challenge that Dominique mentioned. And how do we provide the tools that allow the broad diversity of buildings to be successful? And so NSF International is a global public health and safety organization. Lots of folks know us for our work in standard development and the management of voluntary standards. We've got about 80 standards under direct management, and we support many voluntary schemes for managing sustainability for global supply chains, organic farming, regenerative farming. And in this space, my group has been working around waterborne disease and pathogens. The only thing that routinely kills people in the built environment is water. We got around 52 to 70,000 cases of Legionnaire's disease, not counting all the other risks, in the United States every year. And this moment allows us to think a little bit about how do we allow that kind of condition to exist, where we allow buildings to routinely be operated in failure and kill people, and leverage that around COVID and match up building engineering systems with those process controls. And how do we get that to be done consistently? And the equity piece that we've been talking about, I think is really critical for us right now around COVID. So right now I'm working with an organization that represents over 100 cultural organizations, from small to really sophisticated and big. All of them are getting the exact same soup of guidance that's out there. None of them are getting appropriate tools to allow them to implement that guidance on the ground at their location. It's the same sort of struggle that Dominique's having across the municipal infrastructure, where every municipal building, from a local library all the way up to a large municipal building, are all being asked to implement similar types of control. And we have got the same issue when we talk about commercial spaces. So we've got Natalie being very sophisticated as a property owner with a very diverse tenant base. And within those tenant spaces, all of those tenants are expected to implement the same kind of sophisticated public health and safety management controls. And I think the challenge for us is across that spectrum, all the way from Natalie down to the 5,000 person office, square foot office, how do we align that risk management and give the tools that allow them to be successful? And how do we get those tools into the marketplace? How do we get them into the hands of people who can use them? And how do we make sure that those that the risks that we want to be managed are validated, that they're being managed? So it's one thing to throw out lots of expectations, right? So like Elena was saying, lots of expectations. How do we validate that in such a diverse environment? What's the mechanism? What's that feedback mechanism to allow us to maintain the resiliency over time? And I think that's part of our big challenge.
Thank you, Chris. Great comment, and really important for maintaining this long term. Holly?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Oh, great. Thank you.
And can you see me?
Yes, you're good.
Oh, great. Nope, that's not going to work. There we go. Hi, everyone. I think, so first I am at Southern California Edison, where I do sustainability in our operational services department. And my focus there is sustainability across our fleet, our real estate, and our supply chain portfolios. So really have some hand in how we are interacting with many different diverse user groups. And I will say what our role has been is obviously much more practical and just really boots on the ground and ensuring every one of our 15 million customers is still getting the electricity they need. So as people are working from home, as hospitals are overwhelmed, being sure that the lights are on and that it is not a question for customers is really the primary focus, obviously, of the utility. So my specific role was working with our supply chain and ensuring the three components. Number one, do we have the supplies we need, both from a consumer's perspective as well as from a materials and service perspective? Number two, asking for business continuity plans from those suppliers, and not just your typical business plans, but truly a pandemic. And that was a new conversation. We were definitely reaching out to suppliers who had never seen this kind of ask before. And of course not, it was very, very rare. So really working with them to understand what that business continuity plan needs to have in it, what the expectations were, and how we can continue working together to ensure no breach in that supply chain. And then lastly, workforce planning. And not because people were going to be laid off, but because people were going to be sick. So Edison, as well as all of our suppliers, actually developed workforce plans for 60, 40, and 20% reduced workload, expecting people were going to be sick. And so that is really the crux of how we were planning for that resiliency, and how do we still stay in business and ensure that people are going to get the electricity, ensuring that our field crews, our T&D field crews are still being able to work together, and our grid operations. So not only are we out in the field and trimming trees and actually preparing for wildfire already, but how are we managing the grid and ensuring that the ebb and flow and the people that are controlling and managing our interaction with the Western CAISO region are still able and healthy and able to work in a safe and healthy environment. So a lot of different layers there. You have the suppliers, you have your own workforce health, and then digging deep in customers, of course, as a primary focus. So a lot of different layers to resiliency on behalf of SCE. So,
what an incredible concept, though, to think about. What if all of our workplaces had plans where they could flex up and down in percentage capacity from 20% to 80%. We've all been experiencing a time for weeks now where everyone went almost immediately to 90% wasn't functioning. Imagine how our economy would look different and everything else look different if people could flex down or up just based upon what their situation was. That's pretty amazing. Heather? No? So close? All right, we'll come back to Heather. Ara?
Okay, let me unmute myself. Hi.
There we go. Our resilience group was proving not resilient. You were about to let me down, but here you are. Here you go.
No, Ben.
Okay, wait, no. Am I going next or somebody else is going next, Ben?
No, you can go right now, and we'll come back to Heather in a moment. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Aura Vasquez. I am the principal for Vasquez Solutions, and my consulting group does strategic planning. We do communications and social media marketing and community organizing on the green space. I come from, my background is on organizing exactly on environmental issues. So the reason that a lot of you are able to have prosperous businesses, at least in California and in Los Angeles, have probably something to do with what I have done, you know, with my work in the past. I have also been a commissioner for the Department of Water and Power here in Los Angeles for LADWP, and I consider myself really an advocate at heart. So this conversation is really, really important for us. But I just wanted to frame this conversation and take a little step back before the pandemic happened, when we were like kind of normal people, driving to work, right? Having activities, going for drinks, you know, normal stuff, going to hikes and such, and you know, just having our normal lives. And I think what COVID-19 has been able to highlight is, number one, that we are not ready sometimes as a collective to deal with, you know, curveballs like COVID-19. Number two, that we're actually pretty easy to adapt, which is exciting to see, and it brings a lot of opportunities. And some folks have already spoken about this in terms of building, you know, and that we have a broader, this pandemic has proven the theory that actually we probably care more about people than even our economy. I mean, like, our economy is on hold because, you know, we can't afford for all of us to get sick because we just don't have the infrastructure to in-house all of that, all of us being sick. So where does that leave us in terms of resiliency and where we're moving forward? At least in LA, we have seen the lowest greenhouse gas emissions in the past probably 4 decades, if not more. We have cleaner air. We see people obviously working from home, and that has, you know, a different implication also in our environment. We also see that in certain areas all around the country, and I'm just gonna speak particularly in Los Angeles, we have places where people don't have open space and parks. So for folks that are thinking about open space, and now that LA keeps growing and growing, and we have to rethink and redesign the way we use open space, I'm sure for a lot of you, this is an interesting, you know, point, the fact that folks don't have a place to go to a park. And that's particularly true to my own community here in Los Angeles, where we don't have, you know, a place to go. In California and in Los Angeles, right before the pandemic, we were seeing a pretty boom on renewable energy. And here in LA, retiring 3 coastal gas plants that are gonna just push us to move forward. And I have not heard a lot of this here because we have been focusing more on building and, you know, on building, but the idea that you guys are gonna become the new microgrids that are going to provide energy to our city, because, you know, we have to move to a much more decentralized way in which we produce energy. And therefore, how we make sure that buildings are more energy efficient so that we reduce our energy consumption, that buildings and companies help municipalities and the private sector to also utilize these savings and this way of think about building to invest it in other things that maybe we need as a society as a whole, where we never really were posed with this, you know, type of question. We see a lot of technology. I'm fascinated with the new technology around portals, where you go through kind of similar to what you do at the airport. And it has a certain lighting that kills bacteria and that kills viruses. And it also takes your temperature. So can you imagine in the future, maybe not so far, not so far ahead of us, maybe in August of this year, going through restaurants that are gonna need to have that type of built-in, or even if you return to your office, once you come back, whatever normality. I can even think about normality anymore as I used to think about it before, because we're in charter territory. So imagine that you are allowed to go back to your building, maybe 3 people at a time, or in whichever fashion that your floor plan is, and that your building provides this type of technology, to go through, to literally go through, so that you can kind of cleanse yourself, so that you don't get anybody else sick. They're utilizing lighting right now, where also there's a lot of innovation around lighting, where we can implement that in new buildings, and also can kill bacteria and can improve mood and a lot more. So those are just some of the things that I see in terms of like innovation. I worry that this conversation on equity is always not at the centerpiece of sustainability, and especially on green building, simply because the majority of people, at least in Los Angeles or in urban metropolitan areas, live in apartments, or they're renters. They are people that make $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year. They maybe don't have a patio, and maybe they don't have access to EV infrastructure or to a solar panel, or because of just the way that we have, developed urban plan, our city. So what I would like to see more moving forward is for us to also have a variety of options that also include those places that maybe we don't really have, at first thought, and also communities that are also sitting next to freeways and places where there is more pollution and less access to either renewables or just any sustainable, or parks, or just any sustainable practices in general. So I guess the question that I want to leave all of you before we move on to the next speaker is, what are you doing in your line of business and your business plans with your vision in your company to make sure that we're also accommodating people that are not our usual customer or our usual, ally, or are the regular everyday people that still are taking the bus because they don't drive, or that they couldn't shelter at home because they have to go to work. So I think that you'll be surprised to see the numbers and to see how many of those are actually out there right now, basically in the front lines. So I'm gonna stop there, Ben. I'm looking forward to more.
Thank you. Thank you. Heather, did we get you back? Heather? No? Okay. So with that, I'll ask my first question to this group is really, when we think about resilience, I think we've talked about things on a building level, and I think we've talked about things on a city level, but it's hard to manage that. How do we bring this down to a community level? That's really my question when approaching, especially from a green building perspective, because it's daunting to look at it from a city perspective. At a building perspective, we can manage that, but a lot of people are going to be left out. So how do we really think about this in from a community perspective in response to this crisis?
So I'll take a stab at that a little bit. So one of the things I think from a community perspective, if we take it in smaller bites, and I'll give an example for a project that we're working on right now. So we're working with a downtown planning district that includes lots of institutions. None of them are intimately aligned, other than they share the same general space. Some are big, some are small. And I think the strategy really is to bring those folks together, which is what we're doing, developing consensus about the approach for managing risk that's achievable and sustainable at a baseline level for everybody within that area. And then once we get consensus about how do we approach the management of this COVID risk, the reopening, the strategies for doing that, we do it at a level that it consistently manages risk, but is sustainable for everybody within. And then we develop specific tools that help people implement that option. So this is what we agreed to as a community, as a defined area. Here are the tools to help you be successful in following through on that commitment. Templates, tools, checklists, pre-formatted training for your employees, all kinds of little pieces that allow someone to go, oh, I'll take this one and this one and this one. That's what works for my company. And then stand that up consistently, and then have standardized kind of KPIs that say, are we being successful? Are we not being successful? And then you can start to communicate outward to folks who come into that little community and say, we're aligned, we're doing it well, you can see it. Part of that is also using consistent messaging. So all of the buildings within the community use the same public health messaging, the same signage, the same kind of communication strategies to workers. So everybody's getting similar messages in similar formats and similar design. So it reinforces how do you stay sustainable and resilient. And I really think that's the kind of the key in order to be able to get it consistently managed within small geographies, if you don't want to take it on at a city level. I think you could do it at a city level. But that's an example where we're doing it in real time with folks, and it's been very successful.
And I think that's the opportunity maybe for our green building community. And this comes back to some of the points we talked about earlier about bringing together these different certifications and standards and having a unified voice and message. And I think that's part of the challenge that unfortunately the sort of leadership vacuum in the federal level has left for us, is that, there is this sort of disparate response, right, across, our country, which isn't going to lead to consistency and isn't going to lead to these kinds of tools being available for people on that individual basis, and then knowing what's the right path for us. And unfortunately, it feels like we have to provide that on a community level. Any other comments from this group before we move to the next part? Ara, do you have a comment? Holly?
Yeah, I think the role of government is really important. And as we come together with some of those, certifications and norms, I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of the fact that we are also following certain code and vision from the different cities where we work on. So it's important that, especially now where so many pieces are taking form, from cities are putting together their budget, because with COVID-19 is there's been a lot of moving around monies from general funds and such, and also we just as a society continue having needs, whether it's with COVID or not COVID. We still need to build housing, we still need to be building infrastructure, transportation. So how do we integrate our values in what the city's vision is? And I guess all of us working together with our city officials and our government to make sure that they also think about this when they're designing or they're putting together their vision in terms of urban planning and land use at the city level.
Yeah, no, thank you. That makes sense. Holly, anything you want to add before we move to the next part of the conversation?
Yeah, just briefly. Chris really touched on it, and I think it's that collaboration piece and really listening, because we feel like there's a lot of as we go out to community meetings, we expect to hear the same things, and sometimes we do, but quite often those community needs are different. And so listening to the community and understanding what those needs are, and then being able to digest them, and just as Chris alluded to, giving them the same tools, or individual tools to actually work through things is really important. I think ensuring that collaborative conversation happens and that there is listening is part of a resilient response. Yeah.
Thank you. So typically in our events, we try to talk about some commitments that folks can make to really advance on this issue. And I think about this also in the framework of kind of where we are today to where we might be a couple months from now. So, commitments from developers, building owners, managers, and tenants. What are some of the commitments we think that they can make in at least the short term to advance on this issue? And I'm going to ask this question to the whole group again, if you can kind of click your raise hand function to answer this. What are some commitments that we think we can make? Some of the things that come to mind to me are at least having a framework on how we're going to approach this together. I get the sense that a lot of tenants are feeling very lost right now, and on what part of this responsibility is their responsibility versus the landlord's responsibility. Where does liability really lie? And so, what are some of the things that we think we can really ask folks to commit to who are managing space right now? Natalie, you want to take a stab at this maybe, since you're probably dealing with this issue the most? I think you might be on mute.
I'm happy to jump in, Ben.
I think Natalie's on mute. Go ahead, Elena. Oh, there you go. I think we got you now, Natalie.
Well, this makes me think about something we've touched on throughout this event, which is how all these issues are so intertwined. And from our perspective, it's really hard to have all of these commitments related to our environmental program and our health program and our equity program, and even within each one of those pillars there are different frameworks. So we have a goal around LEED certification and a goal around Energy Star certification, and in a separate program and soon to be goal around healthy building certification. And it's unwieldy, it's hard for us to manage, and I think it's confusing, and it loses meaning for the end users, for our tenants, or the people who occupy our buildings. So I think there's real value in bringing the conversation together without losing sight of sustainability and the mission of USGBC, but trying to take a more coordinated approach would make our overall commitment, I think, easier for us to manage and also more meaningful.
Thank you. Jen, did you have something you wanted to add?
I did. It's been interesting for us. We've just seen a lot of, it's kind of what Natalie said earlier, that people we may have been talking to for 4 to 5 years about moving forward with portfolio level work are suddenly coming forward and saying, we need to do certifications, we need to do testing, what do we do for sensors? It's just a new conversation. So I absolutely hear what you're saying, Natalie. When we're working with our portfolios, doing well portfolio, we're also working with their teams doing SGs and GRES, right? And all of the various reporting, and then also looking at, the equity. I think that's something we have to keep coming back to, is looking at equity and the homeless populations and the people of color, and right, all of these different groups, and how sustainability plays into this. So when I'm looking at the commitments for the developers and the building owners and the managers and the tenants, I'm really looking to fulfill on that for everyone. But as a consultant, it's a lot easier for us because it's our focus. So we really are focused with our clients at whatever level they are, whether it's just benchmarking right now or whether it's making a larger portfolio commitment. So we're seeing globally, locally, nationally, very different commitments coming in, but we're seeing those commitments coming in much more on a portfolio level right now, as well as much quicker, things that hadn't moved in 4 or 5 years are suddenly moving. So I do think that people are willing to make commitments, and it's varying what that commitment looks like, maybe a little bit out of not knowing what to do quite yet, because it's all still so new and we don't know which is really the proven methods, or that's how people may feel, right? So I think there's a lot of things driving why people are choosing what commitments to make, and maybe they just have, quite frankly, certification fatigue, like Natalie may have.
And there's tons of value to certification. It's really great. It's hard when you have 10 different commitments to actually manage them in parallel. So.
Dominique, did you have something you want to add?
Yeah, kind of building on Jennifer's comment as well is we've all, I think, now found that some people in their role are so much more valuable than we knew. And so with this new paradigm, like I've heard people use the term, treat your janitor with the same respect you treat your CEO. And I like that idea. And I think an interesting commitment is, to really honor the workers that are keeping people safe, whether they're on the front lines or they're behind the scenes, and whether you honor them by, wearing your face covering like you're supposed to when you're together, or whether you honor your tenants by increasing cleaning protocols so that they can feel safe in the workspace. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but I think it's more important than ever to respect each other and keep each other healthy.
I think that's a great commitment to honor all people equally. I mean, that would be a great commitment to do within our buildings and within our space. Elena, do you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think a commitment that many people can make is answering the question of what exactly am I going to do to help people feel safe to return? And I would suggest doing that on 3 different levels. Organizational systems, right? This is your flexibility policy. This is, are you going to have people coming in shifts? How are, those kinds of things. Second level is the actual physical building, right? People talked about water, people talked about HVAC, people talked about materials. How are you going to clean differently, et cetera? And in cleaning, right, air quality. How do we make sure that all this hand sanitizer and all this bleach we're throwing at everything doesn't necessarily just set off all of our asthmatics and all of our canaries in the mine, right? So that's second level, physical building. Third level is behavior, right? What exactly are we going to do differently? And again, this is social distancing, but it's also these commitments. And secondly, what I would probably suggest is asking, once you've articulated this to your teams, asking them, building on Holly's comment and Chris's comment, what else do you need from me? And I think that just posing these questions can seem overwhelming, right? But there is a lot of expertise. There's a lot of advisories online. Obviously, there's a gamut of people on this panel. Even posing these questions will start shaping up the answers, and there's a ton of resource. But I think that if within a couple of weeks you can't answer what exactly you're going to do differently on those 3 levels, you're probably creating unnecessary anxiety for yourself and a risk for your business. So I would advise to make that commitment.
Thank you. A lot of our member base are architects, engineers, and contractors. What kind of commitments do we think those folks can make when they're doing their work? I think that's important to think about how can we drive our community to make a commitment. Any suggestions on this topic here in terms of this group? Chris, I see you have your hand up. Did you want to answer this one, or are you trying to answer the previous one?
I think it's a little bit of a combination of both, actually. So about what can we do, what kind of actions can we take? I would say one of the things to think about is how do we organize contractors and vendors a little bit differently? So we had I believe it was the speaker from ABEL talking about some of the challenges with appropriate PPE allocation between construction sites and other things like that. One of the things that we're doing is we're helping design purchase specs for associations and like-minded organizations so that they can combine their purchasing power across lots of little organizations. And I think that's something really practical that cities can help facilitate, large vendors who work with lots of little organizations might be able to help organize, so that they can leverage their purchasing power, get good commitments for their supply of materials, get lower prices, help address our COVID risks, not have idiosyncratic outcomes of who gets hand sanitizer and who doesn't. Thinking a little bit out of the box about how do we collaborate around these vendor services that we purchase, the supply services that we purchase in a COVID environment that we might not have ever thought about, you know, before, but are, you know, potentially really important now.
Yeah, I think having even our architects, engineers, and our contractor community look at how can they combine their purchasing power to help address maybe some of the procurement issues that some of our less sophisticated or less well-funded groups would have to deal with. I think that's a really powerful thing our community could do, and that speaks right to equity, right? And being able to really access things we needed. I think that's really interesting. Anything else before we move to the next segment? All right. So what about for our utility partners and our municipal partners? You know, what kind of commitments do we think they could make in terms of this response? And again, this is through our green building lens. You know, one of the commitments I would think about is that commitment to public health and, you know, really providing a different framework for how we assess the health of our buildings and the investments we make there. You know, some of that could be policy-based or code-based. Any commitments that come to mind here in this segment? All right, no hands raised. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, wait, sorry, not following protocol.
It's okay.
I think a couple things, especially with people not driving, we're obviously seeing amazing air quality right now. And so I think other commitments are also related to fleet infrastructure and fleet charging and just our own vehicle use. And so we're trying to publish some fleet electrification goals and understanding what that means and how that helps our communities, and literally routing trucks to those communities most in need and those that have poor air quality. So not just the buildings, but also the vehicles that we use. The other thing is also obviously renewable energy. So the state requiring us to get to 100% clean power by 2045. I mean, that's huge. And so just tackling those commitments and making sure we deliver on them is really our line of thinking.
And really quickly, I'll jump in and speak for LADWP and also for Edison, although I shouldn't. But we, both utilities, you know, will not turn off anyone's water or power, regardless of whether they can pay their bill. They're also looking to, you know, waive late fees or fines so that, you know, people have essential utility for use at home and at work.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that definitely helps in the short term, and wonder how sustainable that can be, you know, long term, depending on how long this lasts. Chris, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, this is just a really brief addition, kind of thinking about the role of government, particularly K-12 school districts and similar in the leadership role. I think an overarching commitment to transparency about how they're managed and explicit opportunities for feedback from occupants and explicit information about IAQ. Anybody who's worked on getting transparency from public institutions around IAQ is very difficult. And I think that part of building confidence is going to be being more transparent. I know that it's going to be easy to be transparent with the recommendations. It's going to be hard to be transparent with occupant experience and measurements, but that's what it's going to take to build confidence. So I think this is a moment to ask leadership-oriented organizations in the public sector to take the lead in being transparent. It's a thought.
No, thank you. I think that's a good one. So I want to provide a little bit of opportunity for Q&A before we close out. If you have a question, go ahead and throw that in the chat box. This is an interesting question. So one of the questions is from Carl Welty. If large companies continue to rely on central offices, will they continue to do that? How do we maybe see this issue affecting centralization and affecting urbanization? Anybody want to comment on that for a moment? Seems like this might be a good Sam question, maybe, in terms of the sort of general architectural city design.
Well, I'm going to throw out from a public health perspective. So prior to coming to NSF, I was assistant commissioner for environmental health at the New York City Department of Health. And so I look at this stuff from a public health official's perspective. And to be honest, I really believe that we're not going to see dramatic changes over time. So we're going to get to a point where we've got reasonable control, and that's going to happen within timeframes that don't radically adjust urban behavior, is my guess. And I think the other thing that we're going to realize that if we implement COVID safety, employee safety protocols well, we will be able to avoid recurring infections. And that's where that data is really important. What's coming out? How are we managing it? Are we managing it well? But if we are, we'll get reasonable outcomes that allow sort of the return to normal. And Detroit, which was an epicenter of an outbreak, is a really good example of that, where their workforce, their public-facing workforce, had a 2% infection rate at the peak of the outbreak because they had put in good controls on it. We're at the lower end of that outbreak. We put those good controls in, we control that stuff as best we can. I think we're going to move to normal relatively quick. A comfort level. It'll never be exactly the same, but I think we can get to the comfort level if we do it well out of the box. If we don't do it well out of the box, then it's a whole different ballgame.
Thank you, Chris. And the next question we have here, which I think is a great one from Sam, is if we got to have a COVID vaccine distributed in the population in the next 6 months, which essentially I think he's saying, hey, if our problem sort of goes away in the short term, how would we take what we've learned and actually apply it to the future? And I think it's a great question for our green building movement in this moment. So how should we take what we've learned now and apply it to the future? If our coronavirus problem suddenly has a solution, what do we do then? I think that's what Sam's asking. Go ahead, Sam.
I think that's a really important question, because I think what this is really, what we're going through now is sort of the thing that'll change probably more than anything. It's not like we're still gonna have cities, we're still gonna live in the same houses, we're still gonna drive in cars. And some things are not gonna change as much as we think, and some things are gonna change a hell of a lot more than we think. I mean, we're already, the Zoom, telecommuting is not gonna go, you can't put those things back in the bottle. That's gonna be a major change. That's just one of many examples. But it's really about changing how we think about things. Like somebody mentioned before, that DWP is going to be, helping to, if people's water is shut off, or they're not paying their bills, it's not going to be shut off. Just getting that thought, oh wait, maybe we need a better safety net, or if we're building this way, maybe we could build this way better, or if we could, it's really rethinking things that were sort of taken for granted or that were sort of not quite right. And that's, if you think about that and pandemic or not, it's like thinking about, so if we're thinking about fighting a pandemic, how are we going to think about when global warming hits us, or when the next whatever issues hitting us. So it's just sort of like a domino effect of how we think about everything. So it's not really, as I said earlier in the thing, it's not really just about COVID. COVID's just like a spark that's making us rethink and sort of have these kinds of conversations about everything. And that's what's really, it's a horrible way to learn these lessons, but it's really, it's a valuable thing. It's just to get us rethinking and to get us reframing things that we just weren't even paying attention to.
Thank you, Sam. Elena, over to you to sort of have our last comment from the group, and then I'm going to close this out so we can end by 6, because I know everyone needs a longer video call today. I'm sure everyone needs that. I think you're on mute still, Elena. It gets everyone.
Oh, sorry about that.
Okay.
I just have the computer and the audio. Look, I think really the advocacy, I think this is a brilliant scenario in around 6 months. That was the concern I raised before. I really do fear that this has been so traumatic for so many people that the moment people feel safe, they will want to put this behind us and they will not want to hear about it. And so I would then, and I made a comment on the IWI workforce, is that at the moment, I'm not seeing any pathway. At the moment, nobody stepped into a leadership role, not USGBC, not anybody with an actual pathway of how do we take this experience and embed it across policy, across regulation, across incentives, across government spending, across all of these things that we're discussing, let alone what individual developers and property managers can do. So I would very much say that in that scenario, maybe that's what we need to give ourselves. It's just 6 months and actually move. What I definitely can, pretty much vouch for is any massive change is not going to happen by accident. It's not going to be enough for all of us to do our small bits. Not to say we shouldn't do our small bits, but to actually have structural systemic change that is, cemented with policy and law and those sorts of things. If we indeed have 6 months, that's what I would suggest, and maybe that's another commitment to your earlier question, Ben, is that the USGBC, the IWBI, I really hope that those bodies are getting together, World Green Building Council, and saying, we need a pathway. Let's only give ourselves 6 months, because after 6 months, nobody will want to hear about it. And the truth is, we talk about resilience, is that if it's not this, it's something else. We have to make these changes before the appetite to actually talk about these things actually goes away. So that would be my final note. Thank you all for having us.
I think that's a great point. If we have a short window here where people are listening, let's say something meaningful and say it loudly so we can make an impact. I think that's a great point. Well, I want to try to close this out here. As I said at the beginning, we want to try to do this again. I think we would have another event in July and September to just kind of see where our heads are at there and see how this conversation evolves. The commitment that we're making here over at USGBC LA, this is something we've been working on for about a year now, is we're launching a Healthy Building Alliance for the region. This is not a certification, but a commitment that any building owner or tenant can make to provide healthy and resilient space. It's focused on 5 principles around indoor air quality monitoring, green cleaning, providing access to nature, inspiring movement for your occupants, and doing annual water testing. We're launching this program next week, and we're really excited about providing a framework that can hopefully be a gateway for folks to explore the healthy building conversation in a deeper way. And for us, we're going to be providing resources for folks in terms of connecting them to air quality sensor companies, to our local folks like Jen, who can really help guide them through this process. And we're also going to provide some tenant surveys and some baseline structure for people to really get started, especially around green cleaning and how they look at activity and fitness for their occupants. So really excited about this program and about this time being an opportunity for us to really hopefully connect with a lot of people around building health and really help them on a journey to get healthier. Other than that, really talked about some of our upcoming content earlier, but we hope you can join us for more here as we close out May and get into June. We have a lot of really good technical stuff coming up. We actually have a really good session coming up on electrical and mixed fuel pathways in residential buildings, which I think is really interesting. And we're doing a virtual tour in June of Firewise Homes in Brentwood and Malibu. We've done a couple virtual tours so far, and those have gone really well. I mentioned our talent portal earlier. Please come check that out. We're really building an industry hub for talent in our region. And then please get involved in our committees as a way to really help get engaged and be a change maker. As Elena said earlier, advocacy is really important right now, and I see us doing more and more, especially during this window, to really drive change. I mentioned MGBC earlier, August 21st and 22nd. We hope you can come out. We really want to get everyone together to continue this kind of conversation. And we couldn't do the work that we do without our sponsors. They really help provide us the opportunity to really get this message out there. So thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to everyone today on the roundtable. Really appreciate your time and being available for us, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you very much, and feel free if folks want to hang out and chat on the chat, or continue to drink that glass of wine or tea or whatever you got. Feel free. We'll stick around for